All right, well, we're gonna get started. I see a lot of you just kind of working, and since I record this, if you keep one eye up here and keep doing what you're doing, that it doesn't bother me at all. But if you have some questions, certainly now's a good time to do. And I'm really just got a hodgepodge of things that with getting these servers started that you need to do, or maybe you've already done to get through this Tech Prac 1. And there was a lot that came at you, but nothing very dramatic, new and that kind of thing. But as always, take a look at the agenda. And yesterday was Martin Luther King. And I have got the 2 weeks, we have something due this Sunday coming up. And then I've got the next 2 week sprint. It's out there if you want to look and get started. It's committed. And I'll start trying to get a couple of weeks ahead for those that want to do. Since I do a companion online and face-to-face course, the core content is out there. Sometimes what I use especially the Tuesdays for is, I call it the glue or the mortar between the bricks that can just help, or here's a highlighter, here's questions that came up and that kind of thing. So make use of the time. So some more stuff just to read, look at, it helps inform assignments and quizzes and that kind of thing. But so you should do that. But I'm just getting started here and looking at my agenda. On Thursday, like last Thursday, probably won't even hook up, or maybe I'll hook up in case I have to record something, but just ask, are there questions, and help folks finalize, if they haven't already, their VMs. We're going to be using these for several Tech Pracs until we, maybe about Tech Prac 4 or 5 perhaps, repeat some of this, but do it up in cloud VMs, which have the exciting thing that anybody on the planet can access them rather than being just locked in here. So I'll come in and say, gee, questions, can I help? And hang around till, about 2:15. All right, so the biggest thing to be sure you've done, and it's where maybe, I don't want students, maybe quote foul up, but just there's a lot of detail and things that you might miss. A few things some I'll check, and one thing I'll check on your Ubuntu VM is your host name, the first 4 letters of your login, and then LS1. And if it's Ubuntu, then you haven't changed the host name. And, I kind of go like this, well, why does that matter? If we were on a network, it would be very important. It's the host name that tells other computers on the network what to call you. And if we're all named Ubuntu on a network, then it wouldn't work out. So it's an important aspect for that case. I lean in on it a little bit, that when you turn in things, a lot of times I ask you to give me the host name and not who aim, but who am I. And that gives me at least some confidence you're in a VM that sort of you created and it's not somebody else's, and we're all sharing the same one. I think it's about as easy to do the assignments as it is to get somebody else, but it also does that. And there is some guidance in there. In that document, we can kind of go look at it. But there's a system file. And so you remember how Ubuntu works, and Ubuntu is kind of about, you do configuration by getting the right text and the right files in the right places. And so there's this file out in this folder called etc. Got a lot of stuff out there in etc. And settings for system and different things like that. But among many of the files that are out there in etc. is a file called hostname, and when you restart, that's where it gets the host name, and you can change that by directly editing that file, right? And so haven't done a whole lot other than demo. I did something, let me even just get out of this. I did this Nano thing. Nano is a command line editor, and in Linux, and for that matter, in Windows when you're at the command prompt, there is a gedit that comes with the desktop version of Ubuntu that we've installed, kind of a lot like Notepad, maybe a little bit more powerful. But the problem is this involves requiring a GUI, and you might get on an Ubuntu machine and not have the GUI there, in which case you're stuck with the command line editor, and there are several choices, and you can then get even in the editor wars among people. Oh, VI is so much better. You're silly to use Nano, and that I just kind of use Nano as being the most common, and it's always installed. If you're really into it and you do a lot of command line editing, then it might help to make some choices. The way you execute the Nano editor is Nano is the name of the command and then the name of the file. Here I'm using a fully qualified path, so I said /etc. So remember, I happen to be positioned in home T Schultz, and so if I just said Nano, host name, well, it would let me do it. It would create a new file, host name, that it's then going to store, where I am. So this command will edit the hostname file. Notice if I was going to try to change this, oh, and by the way, in the command line editor, you have to get there with your arrow keys. A lot of times, moving the mouse really doesn't relate. So get used to kind of getting to where you need to be with the arrow keys. When you're all done, and you can look down here, these are some of the basic commands. Control X says I'm done. Since I changed things, I'm getting down here at the bottom, asking to save the modified buffer. And if you put a Y, that would say that yes, you want to change it, and would say no, leave it the way it was. And now it says, well, what's the file name to write? And as a default, it's going to come up with whatever file name that you edited, nanoed in the first place. This would be a time if you want to save it as something else, that you could put in a different path down here and a different file name, and that's a way to kind of do a save as. But we're going to find that when I try to save this, I have an error writing etc hostname permission denied. And one of the reasons I got that, so now I'm going to do Control X and no or N to discard changes. Realize that certain areas are protected. You can look at system files in etc, but you can't change them unless you have your administrator mojo. Okay, and the way you get your administrator mojo is to put sudo in front of the command, and you still need the command. So sudo says run as administrator, or if I am one of the root users, if I have administrative privilege, then do this. If login doesn't have administrator privilege, then sudo, it's going to say you're not a member of kind of the root group. And let's see, etc and hostname. And first time you use sudo, or if you wait a few minutes, it kind of goes out. It'll ask for your password, and something you should have gotten used to by now in Linux. I typed the password, but it wasn't doing any little thing like putting stars or circles or anything. It was collecting that password, even though it looked like nothing showed up there. So when you're entering a password in Linux, and you probably got used to that. Now when I try to save this, it works because I had that advanced privilege. Notice that just changing that didn't change the host name. If you restart, it would change the host name. There might be a simpler way, or something that doesn't involve something as involved as a restart to say, get this host name, but certainly if we did, that would do it. And since I really don't want to change the host name when I restart, I think if you looked at the notes, there's a way to There's a host name control. You can set the host name. There's another file out there. It's called hosts. You don't need to fiddle with that one, but you can. And that one has to do with more kind of on the local IP network, changing what the what hosts can be used. And the second line there, you could make it equal to yours if you wanted. So looking at that, changing the time zone in Linux is to me a little painful. Mine is still in Pacific time, this particular version, but I would maybe either get used to it or just realize that you're dealing in Pacific time. So I am going to change the check on the assignment that you changed your host name. I'm not going to check if you changed your time zone. Not A, but L. The -L parameter on ls says list the files. -L says list the files with details. Okay, and then this is where we want to look, and the star is the wild card, right? Means anything that begins H. And so notice it says, oh, that host name was changed to 1010. It really wasn't changed to 1010, well, 1010 Pacific time. And so not a big bit of drama, but you can change your time zone and take care of that. I'm trying to think of anything else in this time zone. And I really recommend, and it's not something I'm going to check, that you turn off automatic updates in your Ubuntu desktop. One of the problems we run into is we're going to start installing software from the command line, and the Ubuntu GUI is going to try to get these packages that represent and have the updates. The problem is those two things then conflict sometimes. You're trying to install new packages and you get an error that says something, well, that the gestalt is, or the result is that, well, there's some updates that are being tried to be installed now. Wait and come back later. Second, and this is maybe in my humble opinion, if I'm server administrator, I like to control when those updates hit my server. I've got users counting on me. Maybe this isn't a good time. Maybe it's going to break something. And I know even Windows Server is going to automatic updates that just squirt down, and I don't know that that's a good practice, even though I realize that those updates may help protect me. The situations where people have been burned because they haven't installed updates, we're talking not installing updates for 5 and 6 years, okay, or months. And I know there are these zero-day exploits, and you need to get those patches in, but it's nice to be able to test and see if they work. That's kind of an opinion thing, but I recommend you do that. It's going to save you some headaches later, and kind of the way to do that is if you open up all the applications, and I think I had it and then I got rid of it, and there's several update things in there, but it's the one that's got the world on it, and that's kind of things, settings and all. So we're doing it through the GUI, and it's probably a way to do it from the command line. I have no doubt. I just don't know what it is. But over on the updates, just ask it to never. And when you do that, it asks for some authority, right? It's not going to just let any user set the updates to never. And I think that's all if we do that. Yeah, I think there's nothing else long term. Might even do that. And I think this is one of those, still getting used to the idea that kind of saves when you change it, is contrasted with, gee, you have to save when you go. And that will save headaches later. It's not something I can sort of say, okay, -5 because you didn't do that. Think of anything else. This one just kind of showing you all the stuff that happens when you first get in, and time zone and blah. Good. Let's look at similar thing on on the Windows server. And the first time in, yeah, doing go on. We are. And I think you knew, but you can view full screen on your VM if you're going to work in your VM for a while, and that sort of gets all the baggage out of the way. And if you hover up at the top, then you can get and this works in VMware Fusion on a Mac too, but you can get the VMware Workstation menu back, and so this way you can kind of focus on what you're doing. But now in Windows, to get a command prompt, you can, to get a command prompt, you can just type CMD, and that's the name of the command and come up. To have your administrative mojo with you, right-click on that and run as administrator. That will, that's needed maybe for any command that you want to run as administrator. There's, and you can always tell whether your command prompt has administrative privilege by looking at this up here. And for some of this kind of stuff in Windows Server, there's this sconfig command, and it's, I got some the example, there are things in the note, but let's see, by using option 5, you can set your updates to manual, okay? And so you're in charge of updates, and it won't check and say, gee, and we're going to install, especially since it's kind of a, I don't want to say a toy VM in the sense that it's we're not learning anything, but it's just something, we just don't necessarily want to wait 15 minutes for an update when we're trying to get in and get me a screen cap or something, but save that for when it's appropriate. And you can use the option 6 on sconfig to actually get the to install updates. I'm not going to do that now. It just takes a while. Let's see, I think 9 lets you set, brings up the date and time bit. It's actually got, but you can also there change the time zone, and you get a handy little GUI. And again, I have no doubt that there's a command line way to do this kind of thing. There is an issue, especially as you get into server admin, if that's where you're headed, well, should I use the command line or should I use a GUI to do my work? And I'm of the opinion, if it's something that you do, sort of a one-off, okay, then I wouldn't worry about figuring out the command line. You're building a server and you're setting the time zone, and taking the little bit of time to figure out the GUI to do that is not so bad. It's when you're doing something over and over and over again that you kind of want to learn the command line, because then you can script it. Now, if I were deploying an array of 100 virtual machines, right, and they're all Windows Server, and I want them all to have their time zones updated, that's the time to learn, well, how do I do this at a command line or PowerShell so I can write a script to do all 100? I'm not logging into 100 servers and taking a day, which would, for something that maybe takes 15 minutes to figure out the script and then 30 seconds to run the script across the way. So there is this, trying to balance the doing, should I do it as is it with the GUI or learn the command line? And the 15 gets you back to the command line. I think I got everything that I wanted to demo for that guy. Just fresh van build, time zone, manual updates, computer. Well, I didn't show you how to set the computer name. Actually, you use option 2 on sconfig, and there are other ways to do that as well. Manual. Seemed like there was one other thing, but I guess, this one's not all that critical. I kind of put the minimal security reporting. This is the telemetry that gets sent back to Microsoft about what's going on. And again, we're doing something that's sort of in a side pocket, and waiting for that. All right, time zone. Yeah, I think that's everything that I can think of on that one. So a little trick of the trade that you ought to be familiar with. You're going to get perhaps to the point, I've got a file on my host and I'd like that file up in the VM, or I've got a file in the VM that I've created and I'd like that down in the host, and that kind of thing. And so there is, we'll go back here. There is a document I prepared that kind of talks about how to share files between your VMs and your hosts, both on a Mac. It's slightly different there. Most people are using PCs, but the Mac kind of thing works. One way to go is you can actually, on a Windows VM to a Windows box, if you can get them both windowed, you can drag and drop and it understands. One way that works pretty much in general, and this is again now doing kind of the GUI kind of thing. Using File Explorer, I've got this new text document. I can right-click and copy, then I can get over somewhere in the file system on my host and right-click and paste. And so you can kind of right-click, copy, go where you need the destination to go, and paste it. And that works pretty well. You can even do that going the other way. You can also say copy, and I think it works if you're going to do that. Yeah, I need to. Oh, another thing I would change is how long it takes. And I forget exactly where that is. I should probably put that in the thing. Change how long it takes before Ubuntu says, oh, let's go to sleep and make you log in again. Because a lot of times you go and maybe I'll send that out in an email. At search, you can search for it rather than take two bad tries or something at it. But you can, if you in a pinch, if you're, say, copying a file into a Ubuntu, I think this will work. Yeah, so I copied it from my Windows PC, used the Ubuntu GUI, the equivalent of Windows Explorer, and got that pasted in there. All right, so copy and paste works. Another thing to realize is in your VMs, you have web browsers, and almost all the time, by default, your VM will inherit the internet connection from your host, and so there's nothing to keep you while you're in the VM from going up to, in this case, I'm going to D2L. I won't log in, but if you had something you wanted to upload that was in your VM directly to D2L or download, or you could upload it into D2L, then get onto the VM or host and download it. So that's another way to work. Just realize that you have everything, you have the entire internet available. Sometimes, and especially Ubuntu VMs, lose the internet connection. There's a couple of things we can try to get it back. I wish I could nail it down. It's going to happen, happens about 2 or 3 students during the term, and 90% of the time we can get it figured out, but there's sometimes, so just let me know, and if that seems to happen, work around. Best way to tell if, I don't know if it's the best way, an effective way to tell if you have internet is just try to ping something that's always there, a beacon, right? Amazon or Augusta Edu or something, just to see if, and if you're not getting internet, then there's only things we can try. But beyond all that, let me come out of full screen. There is a way for both Windows VMs and Ubuntu VMs to share a folder on your host and have that folder accessible on the VM. So I happen to be in this thing called LS1 Demo. I'm right-clicking to get to Settings. And it's over in Options and Shared Folders. And what this will lets you do. It seems like even if I say always enabled, it seems to forget that. But what this will allow you to do is add, and you get this wizard to come up, a host path. So this is on the computer you're using, not your VM. You can choose something like if you wanted your, I was going for documents. Yeah, there it is, documents. Or desktop, whatever you want to share. And you can do more than one. So notice it's sharing that path. And instead of naming that documents, because that's confusing, there's a documents folder in Ubuntu or something. I'm going to call this host docs. And that name doesn't matter other than it's handy for it to be something that you can recognize. Okay, I see what that is. It's just a label, enable to share, and finish. And as I said, you can add more than one. But what that will do is there's this folder in Ubuntu called MNT for mount, and in that folder there's HGFS, and in that folder you'll see all your mounts. And so I'm looking here, when I did ls of this, I'm seeing all those folders, files and folders that happen to be in documents on my Surface. So if I wanted to copy and paste back and forth, I can just use the file system to do what I need to. And that's a way to then share a lot of files and back and forth. Works very similar in from in a Windows box. So I'm getting init settings. You set up the share the same way. You get to it a little bit different. And again, you find the host path, the thing that you want to share from the host. It doesn't need to be documents, but that's a common one. And what we should get, and the network. Usually we get a, see it out here in File Explorer, maybe if I bring up a fresh one. Let me go look at the settings again. Did I? And what you want to do, and this is what I neglected to do, it's easiest to find it if you map as a network drive in Windows Guests. Otherwise, it's a little tricky to find, so that's what I neglected to do on the Windows thing. And then you'll get this shared folders VMware host that kind of maps as the Z, and then it'll let you, and I'm looking at documents on my host, even though I happen to be in the VM. So it shouldn't be anything too much about sharing files back and forth. Oh, a second thing I've got to do, I should be making notes of some of this, but I remember two things. Sometimes when you put a text file, and copy it, especially from the internet, but from another system like a Windows system into Linux, the white space, tabs, spaces, line returns get mixed up, and there's a little thing we can run that will clear that up. That might come into play on TechPrac 2, so I'll be sure to kind of get it there. If I didn't, I thought I maybe had a comment. So two things to do about one, turning off the thing, and so your Ubuntu doesn't share you out, put you to sleep, and there is a way to fix up bad things that get copied. All right, so that's pretty much kind of get all that done. I'm going to finish up today, a demo, and these are, some of them are conveniences, some of them are, if you don't do them, they're going to bite you when, maybe you're working to get something in. That's fine. Reach out and, get to me if you forget to do them. No big thing. One thing that you can do is, this is now all in our, so I'm going to go ahead and get rid of this guy. And I usually shut down from the command line on my Ubuntu sudo, get the admin privilege. And I don't know that I've mentioned this. I think I mentioned in the comments. It's weird that it comes up after you've kind of shut down, but realize that anything that comes in on a USB, the VM could adopt that. So it could be connected within the VM, could be connected to the host. If you really want your, I've got my phone charging. If you'd like your phone accessible in say one of your VMs, the thing is get that VM up in context, then plug in the USB, and then the system will say, well, what do you want? This in the VM or the host? And you can say, no, I want to see what Linux does when I plug in an Android phone or something else. But this would be a nice, handy thing that would pop up if I first started. It's a little bit of kind of a thing. Well, I'm already done, so I didn't know that. But for next time, another thing I want to demo that I just noticed, and one student had asked if I power. You've probably been seeing this, okay? This side channel mitigations enabled, all right? And it turns out that when multiple VMs are running on a computer, this was a hack that kind of surprised the world maybe a year, 18 months ago. There is a way at the very low level on the chip to channel from one VM to another. Now, this doesn't matter so much to us. I've had for a while a Linux VM running and a Windows VM running, and if somebody way smarter than me knew the trick and the side channels were disabled, okay, then in principle, perhaps this VM could see what this VM was doing. The situation comes, you're running Amazon Web Services, or you're doing Microsoft Azure, or anyway, Google Cloud or something, and you've got a big server that's running lots of VMs, and you're this customer, the separate customer, you don't want those side channels. So it's, and there is a way to say, but I would just okay when that comes up, and not worry about it. If it gets really slow, you can probably disable the mitigations, and maybe that'll be the third thing I could look up, just give you a little bit more performance. All right, so we were going to do, this is stuff about the server. As a default, the server manager pops up every time you come in. And it's not a bad thing to have, but sometimes it's after and I'm going to leave it up for some things that I'm going to do, but we don't necessarily want to wait for it to come up every time. And if you just in Manage Server Manager Properties, you can check this, do not start Server Manager at login, and you can always get to it if you need to. While we're here, a second thing that I mention in Windows Server Tips is to turn off IE Enhanced Security. This sounds like a bad thing. So Internet Explorer, Microsoft's legacy browser, that Microsoft on most of its sites doesn't even support anymore, is baked in as far as Windows Server 2019. I haven't looked at Windows Server latest, whether it's 2021 or 2022. So when you get in the server, you have here, how do I get back there? There we are. The only browser you have installed at the start is Internet Explorer. And if you go on local server, it will tell you after a second or two, and I've already turned the IE Enhanced Security Configuration off. If you leave that on, then you're going to get warned every time you go to some other site that this site isn't in the list of allowed sites, and that's going to cause you nothing but time and headache. You won't be allowed to download through Internet Explorer. And say you don't have the mojo to do it. And so one thing I would, is click on this, and I would turn that off for administrators and users in your VM. In that list, I did put an asterisk, by some things that I don't know that that's a general purpose recommendation that any server that is Windows out there would I recommend doing. Actually, I would. If you're going to allow them to have internet and browse at all, it sounds good, but it really isn't all that secure. One thing I'd really suggest too is install Edge, Microsoft Edge, or Chrome, or maybe Firefox in your server to get around some of the things, because less and less sites support IE, and IE is the bit that's there, and only one as a default. Okay. There's this, I would allow, oh no, I need to fix that. All right. Used to be there. Usually it pops up when you first come in about network discovery. I'll kind of find that reference. Another thing, more out of performance, it's gotten better, but I'm going to, from the dashboard, I'm going to remove a feature using the GUI. If you go to Add Roles in Feature Wizard, you can come over here and do the Remove features. And okay, it sounds like a bad thing to remove Windows Defender, and on a server that was sitting out in the real world, I might agree. What I find sometimes is my VM, since it's been idle for a while and I'm starting it up to do some things for class, sometimes takes a lot of time just trying to download the new the images of what the code that represents hacks and that kind of thing. And so I'm spending 50% of my computer time antivirus patterns. Okay, and since this server is a little bit protected, that I was finding that some time that doesn't really need to be spent. I think the pattern has gotten a little better on this, and it isn't taking as much time to on the CPU to check. But there were times when I'd go into Task Manager, and this anti-malware service executable was taking 90% of the CPU, and okay, there's nobody really going to hack this. So that's just a suggestion, and you can get that out if you want by unclicking that and going on. And by the way, that's how you take roles out. We hadn't put a role in. We'll do that in a week or two. It's kind of how you maybe turn it into a internet server, some other things. Just something to look at if you want. There is, and this is a Windows 7, and it's slightly advanced. I won't necessarily, maybe I'll demonstrate how to get there. In Windows, even though you're an administrator, and even when you run something as administrator, you don't always bring all your administrator mojo with you. Sometimes it'll say kind of click again or authenticate to continue on. And so if you'd like to have the, I'm an administrator, I'm smart enough to do what's sensible and that kind of thing. It's local security policy, security options, and account control, run all administrators in admin approval mode. Like I said, a little bit advanced for where we are. but that's how we learn. So there's this local security policy, nice GUI sort of app. You can probably do it the command line or registry edit. Wasn't that local policy, security options? And this is a little peek at where Windows keeps all of its settings. I think in TechPrac 2, you're going to be doing some security policy about passwords and that kind of things. And, just to not have to do this. Run all administrators in approval mode. If I double click on that, you can disable that. And that means if you have an admin mojo, it's not going to say, well, wait a minute, do something. A little bit like logging in as root in Linux. I demonstrated that last week. You can do sudo su in Linux, and then you have root authority, and it doesn't bang you back for, well, give me the password, this requires the sudo and that kind of thing. And it's, notice it's you'll need to restart for that to take effect. I won't restart that yet, but just a thought about what you might do there. Windows Server tips. I do suggest, though, I think in TechPrac 2, I give you a particular policy to do. This password timeout, about 30 days, I think. I don't know what you made your password, but you'll be trying to do something, and it said, oh, you got to change your password, and so you change it real quick. And if you're not careful, you change it real quick to something that you forget that quick too, because I needed to get in. So if you have a discipline about that, then that's great. But there's a way to say, never make these passwords time out. There's a little bit of that's not quite controversy, but a question: is it helpful for users to have to change their passwords every so often? Microsoft has moved to the idea, no. Make them make a complicated, complex password, but don't make them change it all the time or too regularly, because then they start getting into habits of making a pattern that might be easily discovered because you're making me change too much. I know on campus, I have to do it every 6 months. I don't know if yours. That might be a nice balance between too often and too, not monthly. I think you might. And you get to answer the question in TechPrac 2 for yourself, or you get to define, well, what policy are you going to use and why? And both answers can be right, but I would maybe think about doing that, just so you don't kind of, I've got to make up a new password. Again, some of these have, it should probably have an asterisk on there. I don't know, even a server facing the real world. I don't know that changing your password, as long as having a complex and a longish one, is the better protection. But a little bit of a jury out. And kind of the last thing, and I've already demonstrated this a couple of times and last week, but up here on the server, when you're in File Explorer, I would view file name extensions. That really just helps you to see what type of file this is. If you don't have it, and I ask you to name a file called xyz.txt, and then you look at it in File Explorer and you don't see the .txt, if this thing is unchecked, then File Explorer is hiding as a convenience, and to me that's not helpful. It actually throws me off. All right, so, and other than that, I think I'm on my agenda. Pending any other questions, and I was going to maybe do a little bit perhaps with adding a user in these guys. And there's a GUI way to do it and a command line way to do it. And I don't have a video about adding users, but I have a guide that I think does pretty well. That's up in Linux. We're in a Windows server without Active Directory. We might have some references. There was times when we did have Active Directory. So keep in mind we will always add users this way. There is a GUI that tool, the computer management, and you can get down to local users and groups, and you kind of fill that in. But from the command line, this is in Windows. And I don't know if this is good. I forgot to put my admin mojo on this. So this is going to add a user. So net user is the command. The net command does a whole lot of stuff in Windows about users and groups and other resources. The /add is a flag, right? This is going to be the login ID. That's going to be the password. And this is going to be like the full name of that particular user. Okay. What went wrong? I didn't go in with my admin mojo for this, and so easiest thing, or a way to get around that is all right. So that user's in. Let's see. I don't remember the syntax of the run as command. What you can do, I could log out and then log back in as that user, but oh, come on, just give me an example. There we are. So yeah, so run as and then /user:. What this says is I'm logged in as T. Schultz, which in this one is in the administrators. This one says I want to run this particular command, but CMD is the command prompt as a particular user. It doesn't have to be the command prompt. You could run any command. You could run Notepad or something else as that user. Now it's saying authenticate as that user, and so now I'm in a command prompt, but I have demo 1. So whatever I'm doing here, I am doing as with the demo 1 level of authority. Exit out, and I'm back to where I was. So you can kind of check, did that login work? You could also then, you could start and stop and do it this way as the could log in at the command, not the command, but at the Windows opening. Only one person can be logged in locally to the machine. We're going to look at how others could remote in at the same time. In Ubuntu, it's very similar. I'll just look at the documentation and then I'm going to be quiet because I think you probably can get this. There is a GUI way to do it, but it's add user. An add user really is almost a script that goes through a lot of things. There's a user add that is not quite as complete in terms of setting up resources. So that's the command, and it's going to go through asking for a password. And even at the command line, it's tough to get it as one command. We could look at how to do that, but you'll have some things to do, putting in a password, and then it's going to ask some things, and you could just press enter on these, but room number and that kind of thing, and that's the way it goes. If you just wanted a minimal user without setting up their documents folder and information about them, then you need to add them and give them a password, and the equivalent to run as with a command for a user in Windows is the SU of the user. So if I created demo 1 and I wanted to log in as demo 1, then I do SU demo 1, and if I have their password, I could get in as demo 1, and that's adding users in Linux. It's very similar, and I ask you to get a couple of screen caps while you're logged in as that new user, so I think it goes pretty quick. All right, so I am going to then probably just stop